The boomers won. They hit with a heavy attack of insults, immaturity, and lack of emotional regulation, and embarrassment so potent that I decided to make this a series on all the generations. You see, when the boomers attacked me in the comments, they only confirmed the facts that were being stated in the video. They did nothing short of show the internet that the stereotypes and the statistics are true. To the boomers, thank you. You helped launch this platform and its content higher than I expected. To the Gen Xers and the Millennials who supported, thank you, and I'm sorry. But in the spirit of fairness, we have to do a deep dive on your generations as well. So, out of control for me, get ready to put me in my place very quickly. Gen X is now on the menu. Welcome to the show where we break down the mental health stigma, navigate sobriety with humor, and prove that it's okay to laugh while you heal. Let's get real, let's get honest, and maybe a little weird. Growth is messy, but you don't have to do it alone. This is Sober Psychology. If the baby boomers are a brick wall built in an alternate reality, Generation X is a ghost town with a sniper on the water tower. Every single day, millions of millennials and Gen Zers try to have an emotionally honest conversation with their Gen X parents, and they're met with a psychological defense mechanism so cold, so detached, and so deeply ingrained that it feels like talking to a shadow. You bring your trauma, your anxiety, and your desire for a deep connection to the table, and they look at you, shrug their shoulders, and just say whatever. Stop trying to force an avoidant archetype to play the role of an emotionally integrated guru. They don't know how. Today on Sober Psychology, we're moving past the boomers. We're putting Generation X under the clinical microscope. We aren't here to cry about it. We aren't here to play the victim. We're going to look at the brutal, unvarnished truth of the Latchkey Generation. We're talking about the development of dismissive avoidant attachment style on a mass scale, the psychological phenomenon of hyper-independence as a trauma response, and the spiritual tragedy of a generation that traded pathetic family leadership for institutional cynicism and dark sarcasm. If you're tired of being frozen out by the people who raised you, or if you're a Gen Xer wondering why your internal emotional landscape feels like a barren West Texas desert, you need to understand the machinery of this mindset. I'm Michael. I'm a psychologist in training. I'm a sober dad. And today, we're shining a light into the darkest corners of the forgotten generation. Let's get to work. Welcome back to the show, everybody. If you're tuning in on Spotify or you're watching us right here on YouTube, I appreciate you sitting at the table with me. All right, we have to talk about what happened after the video on the boomer generation. My comment section was an absolute war zone. I had boomers calling me every name in the book, telling me that I'm entitled, telling me that I don't know anything about hard work, completely proving every single clinical point that we made about cognitive dissonance and the just world fallacy. But amidst all that noise, I noticed a fascinating pattern. A lot of you reached out and said, Michael, the boomer stuff is real, but you need to look at my Gen X parents because they don't fight with noise, they fight with absence. Living out here in Midland, Texas, you see the generational handoff happening in real time. You see guys out in the oil field working 80 hours a week, grinding themselves into dust, trying to stay sober, trying to keep their families afloat in a brutal 2026 economy. And when they look to their Gen X bosses or their Gen X fathers for guidance, they don't get the boomer lecture about buying iced coffee. Instead, they get a cold, hard, we'll deal with it, nobody's coming to save you. Before we dive into the data, let's establish our baseline guardrail for this episode. This is a macro psychological generalization. Human behavior exists on a spectrum. Not every single person born between 1965 and 1980 fits this mold. If you had emotionally present, highly integrated Gen X parents who validated your feelings and didn't leave you to raise yourself, praise God, you won the genetic lottery. But today we're talking about the cultural and statistical archetype. We're talking about the environment that shaped the vast majority of this generation. To understand why Gen X is so emotionally insulated, you have to look at the environment that they were marinated in during the most critical periods of their brain development. Every generation is a reaction to the one that came before it. The boomers were obsessed with self-actualization, the me generation, chasing their own careers, their own divorces, and their own personal fulfillment. So what happens to the children when an entire culture decides to go find themselves? The children get left at home with a key around their neck and a microwave dinner. Gen X was the first generation in modern history to experience mass structural childhood neglect as a standard parenting model. The 1970s and the 1980s saw the explosion of the dual income households and skyrocketing divorce rates. The latchkey kid wasn't a rare anomaly, it was a cultural norm. Think about the psychological reality of a 7-year-old child walking home from school alone, unlocking an empty house, turning on a television set to fill the silence, and then being told, don't open the door for anybody, have dinner ready, or don't mess anything up until we get home. In developmental psychology, as well as many times on this channel, we look heavily at attachment theory, which was pioneered by John Bowlby and then expanded by Mary Ainsworth. A child's brain is a prediction machine. It looks at the primary caregivers and it asks one fundamental question. If I'm in distress, are you going to show up? If the answer is consistently yes, then the child develops a secure attachment style. If the answer is unpredictable, they develop an anxious attachment style. However, if the answer is consistently no, if the caregiver is emotionally or physically absent, the child's brain adapts to survive. It develops a dismissive avoidant attachment style. Gen X on a cultural scale is the embodiment of dismissive avoidance. When a child realizes that their emotional distress, their fear, their loneliness won't be met with comfort, the brain downregulates the attachment system. The child unconsciously realizes that depending on others is dangerous. Expressing needs leads to rejection or disappointment, and I can only rely on myself. This isn't a personality trait. It's a structural rewiring of the nervous system. When you look at your Gen X parent today and wonder why they completely shut down when you try and talk about deep emotional issues, you're looking at a 50-year-old survival strategy that was forged when they were 8 years old sitting alone in a dark living room. Because they were forced to self-soothe and to self-regulate before their prefrontal cortexes were fully formed, Gen X developed a massive psychological defense mechanism: hyper-independence. Now, let's be honest, our culture praises independence. Out here in West Texas, we worship the myth of the rugged individualist. But in clinical psychology, we know that extreme hyperindependence isn't a sign of health. It's a classic trauma response. It's a coping mechanism designed to prevent the individual from ever being vulnerable enough to be hurt, neglected, or even abandoned again. Gen X wears their self-reliance like a badge of honor. They love to brag about it. You've seen the memes that they post on social media. We drank from the garden hose. We rode bikes without helmets. We stayed out until the streetlights came on and we turned out just fine. Here's the hard truth, and let me be brutally honest with you here. You didn't turn out fine, you turned out numb. There's a massive difference between resilience and emotional flattening. When you brag about how your parents didn't know where you were for 12 hours a day, you aren't bragging about a healthy childhood. You're normalizing chronic hypervigilance. You learned how to survive without adults, which means that you learned how to bury your vulnerability 10 feet under the ground. So how does this manifest in adulthood? It manifests as severe emotional compartmentalization. Gen X is incredibly effective in crisis situations. If the world is ending, you want a Gen Xer in the room because their nervous system is deeply familiar with chaos and isolation. They don't panic, they execute. But that exact same mechanism makes them completely inept at relational intimacy. In the workplace, they're the ultimate solitary operators. They struggle to delegate, they view collaboration as a waste of time, and their leadership style is often micromanaging or completely hands-off. In marriages, they practice emotional social distancing. They can share a mortgage, a bed, and a bank account with someone for 30 years while keeping their true inner world completely locked in a safe behind their ribcage. And then in parenting, they provide physical safety and material goods, which are things that they often felt they lacked. But when their children required emotional attunement, Gen X just froze. They met their kids' emotional needs with the same tool that they used on themselves: dismissal. All right, we can't talk about Gen X without addressing the unique structural pressures that they face right now in 2026. They're the ultimate sandwich generation. Go ahead and coin that term. On one side, they're dealing with the aging boomer parents who are living longer, hoarding resources and refusing to step down, and demanding massive amounts of logistical and emotional management because of their own lack of emotional regulation. And then on the other side, they have millennial and Gen Z children who are demanding a level of emotional vulnerability, validation, and relational depth that Gen X has literally never trained to provide. I made a little chart for my visual folks to help you understand what a sandwich generation may look like. When you're trapped in the middle of two highly vocal, emotionally demanding demographics and your primary coping mechanism is avoidance, how do you survive? You medicate. As a sober dad, a recovered alcoholic, this is where the gloves come off. Gen X doesn't have the loud theatrical meltdowns that the boomers typically have. They don't go on public rants at the grocery store. They're much more insidious. They practice high-functioning numbing. Gen X is the generation of the functional alcoholic, the corporate workaholic, and the prescription-medicated coping loop. They're the generation that normalized the wine mom culture and the recreational drinking as a personality trait lifestyle. Because they were raised to believe that showing pain or asking for help is an admission of weakness, they don't seek therapy at the rates of the younger generations. Instead, they go to work, they come home, they open a bottle, and then they turn on a screen and they log out of reality. They aren't explosive, they're implosive. They burn out from the inside out, maintaining a pristine lawn and a stable 401k while their emotional connections atrophy into dust. And if you call them out on it, they deploy their ultimate armor: dark, cynical humor. Sarcasm is the linguistic currency of Generation X. It's actually a brilliant defensive weapon because it allows them to acknowledge a painful truth while simultaneously distancing themselves from the emotional weight of it. It's a joke, right? Yeah, whatever. All right, let's take this deeper. Let's look at this from a spiritual and biblical perspective. The primary spiritual enemy of Generation X isn't pride or greed or rage, it's apathy. It's the spirit of cynical resignation. It's the belief that nothing matters, nothing changes, systems are fundamentally corrupt, and the best that you can do is look out for your own, keep your head down, and survive. In the book of Revelations, chapter 3, verses 15 and 16, we see a terrifying diagnosis of this exact spiritual condition. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Cynicism is often mistaken for wisdom. Gen X prides themselves on being the realistic generation, the one that didn't buy into the utopian delusions of the boomers or the idealistic crusades of the millennials. But from a biblical perspective, chronic cynicism is a form of spiritual cowardice. It's the refusal to hope because hoping requires vulnerability. It's the refusal to engage deeply with the world or with your children because engagement might lead to crucifixion. Malachi 4:6 gives us one of the most profound generational promises and warnings in the entire canon of Scripture. It says that before the great day of the Lord, God will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. Notice the order of operations in that text. The healing of a generational curse doesn't begin with the children understanding the parents. It begins with the fathers turning their hearts to their children. Gen X has spent decades providing for their children physically while remaining emotionally and spiritually unavailable. They built houses, but they didn't build altars. They passed down a work ethic, but they didn't pass down a vocabulary for suffering, for redemption, or for a deep, authentic connection. They substituted passive presence for active spiritual leadership. When a father refuses to turn his heart towards his child, when he meets the child's vulnerability with a wall of sarcasm, avoidance, or substance-fueled checked-outness, it creates a profound spiritual wound. It tells the next generation that their souls are an inconvenience. So where do we land the plane? If you're a millennial or a Gen Z listening, and you're realizing that your Gen X parents are operating with a deeply entrenched, dismissive, avoidant attachment style, how do you live with this reality in 2026? First, you have to practice radical acceptance. You have got to stop going to a dry well expecting to draw water. If you keep bringing your deepest, most raw emotional traumas to a parent who has spent 50 years mastering the art of not feeling, you're choosing to break your own heart over and over again. Here's the tactical blueprint. Dismantle the expectation. Accept that they may never say the words, "I understand how you feel." They may never validate your emotional experience. Grieve that loss, but accept it as a structural reality. Then speak their language when necessary. If you need to communicate with a dismissive, avoidant individual, walls of emotional prose will cause them to retreat further into their cave. Be direct, be clear, and focus on objective realities. And then finally, recognize low-key affection. Gen X doesn't do long, tearful embraces. Their love language is operational. Did they check the oil in your car? Did they help you fix a leaky pipe? Did they show up to build something with their hands? To them, that's vulnerability. It's the only way that they know how to say, "I care about you," without triggering their survival defenses. And finally, If you're a Gen Xer listening to this and the truth of this script is making your chest feel tight, good. That tightness is your heart trying to beat through 50 years of scar tissue. You can't blame your boomer parents forever. You can't let that key around your neck define the rest of your life. You're the adult in the room now. The hyper independence that saved your life when you were 10 years old is actively suffocating your marriage and alienating your children today. It's time to put down the armor. Sarcasm is a cheap substitute for wisdom. Alcohol is a counterfeit peace. Turn your heart towards your children. Pick up the phone and call them, not to talk to them about the weather or politics or the economy or the oil fields, but to ask them a question that requires you to actually look them in the eye. How are you really doing? And how can I support you? And when they answer, you better shut your mouth. Don't interrupt. Don't dismiss. And don't tell them how much harder you had it back in 1984. Just sit there, take the hit, and listen. We're breaking generational curses on this show. The buck stops with us. Well, that's all I got for today, boys and girls. We went deep into the ghost town, and I know that some of that truth is heavy, but just remember that the truth doesn't hurt you, it frees you. If you got any value out of this episode, do me a huge favor. Smash that subscribe button on YouTube, leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop down to the comments right now and let me know, what was the ultimate latchkey survival tactic that you developed growing up? Or what's the biggest emotional wall that you run into with your Gen X parents? Let's talk about it in the comments. Let's look at the data, let's let it go, and let's get back to work. Keep your head up, keep your heart open, and go help somebody. Love you guys.